What do you get when you make a turn-based JRPG out of The Matrix, but with steampunk? An interesting combination when you think about it, which is exactly what this game is. Resonance of Fate, also known as End of Eternity in Japan, is an RPG developed by Tri-Ace, the developers most known for the Star Ocean and Valkyrie Profile series. Originally released in 2010 for the PS3 and Xbox 360, Resonance of Fate was remastered with 4K HD graphics for the PS4 and Steam in 2018. I first happened to stumble upon this game with one of its more well-known scenes online. You know the one. Yeah, that's the one. Being a kid with no money, I didn't really get a chance to play it. But now as an adult with some money, I bought this on Christmas in 2020, played it for a couple of hours, dropped it, picked it back up in August of 2021, dropped it, then finally finished it this month. Now, after 3 years, 65 hours of game time, and having started a YouTube channel, which is doing better than I expected, I have now decided to make a review for this game. Why? Because it's Christmas. And what better way to get into the holiday cheer than to play a game discussing the philosophies of God, life, and slamming kids with presents? The story. In the not so distant future, Earth has been polluted so badly that just stepping outside will kill you. To protect themselves from extinction, humanity created Basel, an air purification system controlled by Zenith, humanity's new god and controller. But as the pollution on Earth grew worse, humanity was forced to build their new society around Zenith's tower, creating the city of Basel. And while they found safety with Zenith, society had reverted back to a form of aristocracy, where the ruling elites, the cardinals, live in Chandelier, a city of luxury, at the top of the tower, while the middle and lower classes live near the bottom, where absolute poverty stricken those at the base of the tower. So, not much has really changed. You play as a trio of hunters. Vacheron, a former soldier of the Cardinals, who puts on a debonair and carefree attitude to hide his past and grief, not unlike a certain humanoid typhoon with the same name. Zephyr, a former student of Faith who went mad and was taken in by Vacheron after the latter shot the former in the head twice, but survived. Finally, there is Liane, or Rinbel in Japanese, their newest recruit after she was saved by Zephyr from attempting to kill herself on Christmas by jumping off from Chandelier. As hunters, these three go about their days completing missions and tasks for the Cardinals, but soon have their past caught up with them. In essence, your usual JRPG storyline, but with enough of a twist to make it stand out. So here's how the game will pretty much play out. First, you get your main mission, then you head to the specified location, usually a dungeon. Eliminate the enemies that stand in your path, then take on the boss. Kill the bastard, and your mission is complete. However, when you do finish the main mission, you don't have to move on to the next chapter, if you don't want to. Instead, you can go do other things, like explore Basel, grind for money and items, or complete side quests for money and items. There are two modes of exploration. In the overworld, you're a cursor, and in towns and dungeons, you have direct control of a character of your choosing. In towns, you'll find shops that will sell items, materials, and parts for your guns, a tinkerer, who will create parts, ammo, and grenades for you with your scraps, and a scrapper, who will break down items into materials for your tinkerer. In Ibo City, your hometown, there is a clothing store where you can buy clothes for your characters. For what purpose? Nothing really, but there's nothing that says that you can't kill in style. Also, be mindful that there are certain items you will need for side quests later on, and if you happen to use them, then you'll have to go out and grind for them again. Speaking of side quests, as hunters you can take up missions with the local guild's request board, which there are two types, red elimination missions and green fetch quests. Elimination missions require you to kill the target, and once you do, you'll get your rewards. With fetch quests, you'll have to talk to the client, get info on what they want, collect or deliver it, and return to them. Dungeons consists of a bunch of hexes where you'll encounter enemies to fight as you progress. In these areas you may find boxes that will give you items, and word of warning, these boxes can be destroyed, so you'll either want to get them first, or kill everyone so you can get them afterwards. There's also an arena next to Ibo where you pay to fight in battles, and when you win, you'll earn a small bonus on top of your entry fee, and tokens to exchange at the token shop. In the overworld, you control a cursor where you'll use hex pieces to clear out blocked paths to get to your next destination, with there also being colored hex pieces needed to open certain areas. In the overworld map, you'll be forced into random encounters, which can get pretty annoying with how often they all appear, but there are accessories to lower encounter rates, or you can just walk through the exits to leave. While clearing out blocked paths on the map, you may find treasures that will give you healing items, ammo, grenades, and accessories. Throughout the game, there will be red glowing hexes on the map, which are challenging encounters. Though depending on how far you are in the game, these encounters may seem either very easy or really annoying. There are also single colored hex pieces called energy stations, which set up a healing and save spot on the map. Clearing out all grey hexes on a level will grant the ability to walk back to Ebel. To get energy stations, you can earn them as mission rewards or exchange 5 hex pieces of the same color at guilds. There are also terminals, which require a certain number of colored hexes on the map, which power them on and grant bonus perks to the player. You can link up other terminals with the same color, which also increases their hex space requirements. On normal, you won't really need them, but they can be helpful. On harder difficulties, I'd expect them to play a bigger part. Finally, there is a time system where time will change as you explore or play, changing which enemies you may encounter or when missions can be accepted or continued. Luckily, you don't have to wait for time to keep moving, as you can change time willingly by resting at home or at energy stations. Before I talk about the combat system, let's talk about the weapons your party can equip. There are 3 weapon types: handguns, machine guns, and grenades. Handguns deal direct damage, machine guns deal scratch damage, and grenades also deal direct damage but can also inflict status effects on the enemy. Now, what's the difference between direct and scratch damage? Well, direct damage will whittle down the enemy's health bar to kill them, but very little at a time. They can perform gauge breaks, which will break the enemy's health and armor bars into segments, stunning them in the process. Scratch damage will turn the enemy's health bar blue with shots that land, but will not kill them. This causes the enemy to be weakened, which allows handgun users to deal massive direct damage, or destroy them if you scratch them enough. In addition, there are 2 support items, the first aid kit and magazine case. The first aid kit allows you to use healing items in battle, while the magazine case allows your weapons to fire bullets with different effects. With the first aid kit, you should take care not to throw items with enemies between you and your party member, because you could accidentally heal them. For your grenades, first aid kit, and magazine case, pressing the back button will allow you to change which item you have on hand. Pressing the triggers allows you to change what weapon you have in your hand, and if you're dual wielding, you can switch between 1 or 2 guns. Though I don't see any reason why you'd want to do so. Alright, now for the combat itself. The game has a sort of active time battle system, where time only moves when you move. On the bottom right is your party UI. You can change the character you're controlling with bumpers, and when you move, the selected character's gauge will light up, locking you in until you finish or end the turn with the cancel button. To move, you just control your character with the left joystick, and to attack, press the attack button, and a reticule will be placed over the targeted enemy. Once the reticule finishes its first charge, and maybe a few more after that, press the attack button again to fill the enemy with lead. The bar will deplete with every step your character takes, until it runs out, and when you attack, the bar will drain fast, sometimes before you can even take the shot. While you're moving, the enemies will be focusing on all members of your party, which you can tell either by looking at their action gauge, which will have the first letter of your respective party member on it, and the crosshair next to your party member's name on the UI, with yellow meaning that they're being targeted, and red indicating that they're about to be attacked. If you want to get more movement, attack charges, or avoid getting attacked, you can do so by performing hero actions, which will reset your character's action gauge. Pressing the hero action button will cause a cursor to appear, and as you move it throughout the field, a line will connect between the cursor and your character. When you've chosen where to move them, press the button again to enter a run that allows them to run and gun while repositioning. While you're running, the reticule will charge up a lot faster than usual, well, depending on whether you're running towards or away from an enemy, and will reset if you decide to change targets. Pressing the attack button while in hero run and you perform a flashy attack. And if you press the hero run button again, your character will jump high into the air, get some extra charge time, and also bypass the enemy's armor if you attack. While running, you should be careful of obstacles along the way, or you'll crash and stop what you're doing. You can stop running early by pressing the cancel button, but if you've jumped, you'll stop doing so until you land. If you perform a hero action between your party members, the line will glow and give a resonance, which will increase every time they run between each other. Having resonance allows the party to perform a tri-attack, where by pressing the button, lines will glow between all 3 characters, and once you've selected the order of attackers, press the hero action button to get everyone running and attacking. Take into consideration how far apart each team member is from each other, because the closer they are, the shorter their run will be. Also watch out if there's an obstacle along the way, because that'll also stop them. Resonance can only be kept if each member hero runs between each other. If you readjust hero action away from them or cancel the turn, then the number of resonances will drop. During hero actions, your character will have a chance to activate certain effects and multipliers with their weapons if they build up enough charges. Now, while hero actions are useful and cool, you can only perform them a certain amount of times due to the bezel gauge at the bottom of the screen. These bezels indicate how many hero actions you can perform, but you can refill empty bezels by either killing an enemy, breaking their armor, or if you broke their gauges, you will regain extra bezels each time their health drops below the threshold. If you run out of bezels, you'll enter a critical state where your team will be vulnerable and the enemy will decimate you, unless you kill an enemy before that. Also, if one of your team members have to be scratched to completion, your bezel gauge will break, causing bezel shards to fly out, which you'll have to pick up to fill up the gauge again, or the enemy will heal themselves. And if your vulnerable team member is attacked or scratched, they will die. Defeating all enemies will refill your bezel gauge, but if you leave the battle before doing so, you'll have to work with less in the next battle. And while tempting as it is to just jump and fly around, raining lead on the enemy, it's best not to use the hero actions too often at the start, as you'll only have a few bezels to use. But as you continue to play, gaining more bezels and upgrading your characters and weapons, then you're more than free to skate uphill on a motherfucker. When you're on a hero run, firing enough times an enemy will cause them to get juggled in the air. The chances of juggling opponents grow if you're dual wielding. While the enemy is airborne, there will be a yellow circle placed over them that will fill with each shot. This is the bonus shot gauge, and occasionally the game will pause as the arrow spins around the gauge. If you're lucky, or the gauge is filled up enough, and the arrow lands on the yellow circle, you'll enter the bonus shot mode, where your character stops running and aims at the falling enemy. As you build up charges before the enemy lands, press the attack button and you'll shoot the ammo so fast the enemy will fly up again as they drop items like a pinata. Also, if your target is airborne, you can jump into the air and if angled right, fire down on them to perform a smack down attack, which damages them and also causes items to fly out. These items are silver and gold chips, which will become your main source of income as their only purpose is to be sold at shops. That's because the original way to farm money in this game was patched out for the re-release, so you'll have to work for your money. In certain combat situations, there are bunkers, protective walls with openings where you and the enemy can fire from. Positioning is very important in this game because if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, one of your team could be overrun by the enemy. There are two methods to end enemy encounters: leader assault and threat suppress. A leader assault ends the battle quickly as you kill the enemy leaders, which allows you to get everything they dropped and a small chance to get the things the other enemies drop as well. Threat suppressed is the total annihilation of the enemy and you'll get everything they drop. Enemies have elemental resistances and weaknesses, and also a durability scale indicating how hard or soft their body and armor are, which indicates how difficult it will be to break their gauges. This can be useful for more difficult fights, like bosses or red hex encounters. While the game looks complex, like you need to brush up on your trigonometry, it's actually pretty simple once you get the hang of the combat, and even more so when you're leveled up and geared out, to the point where you can kind of just brute force your way through the combat. By the end of my playthrough, my setup was this: one dual-wielding machine gunner who will deal a ton of scratch damage and bonus shots, one dual-wielding handgunner so that bonus shots and gauge breaks will occur more often, and finally, one more handgun user with either grenades for challenging encounters or a first aid kit to heal the party or escape dungeons. If you happen to fail a combat encounter or can already tell you messed up, you have the option to retry the fight, which costs 100 rubies at first, then costs 100 more each chapter. If you're running low on bezels, you can retry while also refilling the bezel gauge, which is honestly not worth it if you have a lot of bezels. Or you can reload from your last save, which I would say is most useful if you're fighting against those red hex enemies, as you can quickly head over there from your energy station. There's also the option to suspend the game, which temporarily saves the game for you, but I never really used, so I can't say much about it. On that note, save often. Very often. You don't want to have to lose hours of progress just because you forgot to save and have to do everything you did again. And if you do happen to need a refresher at any point, press the start button and you can read the in-game manual, or head over to the arena and redo the tutorial. In this game, a character's level is the sum of all their individual skill levels with each weapon, which means that you should change everyone's weapon every now and then. Leveling up increases a character's health, weight limit, and unlock or improve certain skills for the weapon classes. It doesn't say it, or at least I don't think it does, but leveling up also increases the length of your action gauge. Experience increases with how much damage a character does to the enemy. With machine guns, they'll level up with each amount of scratch damage done, while with handguns and grenades, all scratch damage and direct damage done to the enemy is converted to experience. There are also accessories that can be equipped to give your team resistances, and also some other bonuses like more item drops while gaining less experience, or a higher chance to perform bonus shots while doing less smackdown damage. And finally, onto the main attraction of Resonance of Fate, gun customization. If you've heard about this game before, yes, you can customize your gun to the point of impracticality. And when I first saw this menu, I nearly had a panic attack. It can be very daunting as you have to consider what parts to put in, but I'll just put it simply like this. Bigger number means better gun, except for weight, but by the end of the game, you don't really have to worry too much about weight limits. Some may say that you should focus on customizing your guns over leveling your characters, which they definitely have a point, as the higher your weapon stats are, the easier it will be to level up with all the damage you will deal. The stats for your guns are these: charge speed, which increases how fast your initial charge is; charge acceleration, how quick subsequent charges will fill up; rate of fire, how fast your bullets will fire out; bullet focus, how much spread your bullets will have, with higher focus meaning less spread; magazine size, how many bullets your guns will have; and finally weight, how heavy your guns will be with all the attachments they have. This is where you will be mainly spending your time grinding for resources and money, as the better parts you get, the more mayhem you can make. Experimentation is highly encouraged, but there should be guides floating around somewhere if you want the most optimal guns possible. Also, just so nobody goes through the same mistake I did, you can move your gun around with the right stick. As dumb as it sounds, I only realized that about a couple of hours in. Being a 7th gen game, I would expect at its time it would have been nice to look at, though looking at the footage of the original, it does have that Vaseline filter that a lot of games had back then. But for the re-release, it looks very crisp now that everything's been up-resed. The color is a little muted, but considering it's a post-apocalyptic game, that makes sense. I do like how environmental design changes to reflect which level of Bowser you're on. Chandelier looks pristine and clean, looking sort of like an upper-class Dickensian neighborhood, while the middle levels look livable, but have some grunge here and there, while the bottom levels are pretty much just slums. The steampunk aesthetics is an interesting choice, as it's not really something you see in games. This is because the director, Takayuki Suguro, noted that sci-fi is used often, and sets things very far into the future, while this game is meant to be set somewhere that could be closer to reality. Enemy designs are distinctive enough to indicate which threats you should worry about. Human-sized and smaller are usually not threatening, except for when they're in a pack, and depending on their armor and weapons, they can be a pain. The bigger the enemies get, the more you have to worry about, and if they have armor on, you better make sure you're ready to get your ass handed to you a couple of times. Speaking of, when you destroy an enemy's armor, it is reflected on the model, which is a very nice touch, and it shows the amount of thought put in by the developers and designers. With the re-release, Tri-Ace added a free high-res texture pack to download, which sharpens some textures and adds some more shine and gloss here and there. But in all honesty, it doesn't really make that much of a difference, especially since the game has already been up-res from the original. I mean, if you're very attentive to details, or things are up close, then you can kind of tell the difference. But for the most part, there isn't much to see, so it's really up to you whether you want to download the extra 66 gigabytes, but still it's a nice thought to have it separate from the game. Also, most of the game's cutscenes are done in engine, but there are FMVs, and the contrast between the two is night and day. The audio in this game is a delight to listen to. All sound effects, from gunfire to explosions, are very impactful, perhaps a little too impactful at times. You may want to turn down the sound effects volume just a bit when you get more than 10 bezels, because when they refill all at the same time at high pitch, with no warning whatsoever, it's not a good time for your ears. The music was composed by two people, Motoi Sakuraba, who has done music for the Star Ocean, Tales, and Mario Golf series, and Kohei Tanaka, composer of Gunbuster, One Piece, and the Sakura Wars series, which makes sense why the music is so great to listen to. Sakuraba handled the battle themes, which are very upbeat and intense, filled with synths, guitars, and drums, while Tanaka worked on the cutscenes and town music, which are usually calming, sometimes whimsical, orchestral tracks. With each area and dungeon, there are two versions of each track. For towns, there are day and night tracks, while dungeons have low energy, somewhat easygoing music for normal fights. The boss battles are high intensity, so you know that shit's going down. The voice acting is quite pleasing to listen to. I mainly played the English dub, and all of the casts are pretty spot on and sounded pretty natural, at least those meant to sound natural. The more colourful characters had performances that reflected their more colourful nature. Nolan North, Scott Menville, and Jessica DeCoco who voiced Vashon, Zephyr, and Leanne respectively, all did a fantastic job in voicing these trio. I noticed that at times the lip syncing was pretty lax, as some lines didn't really match the lip flaps, but honestly, it's for the better. One thing that I also loved about this game was that during boss battles, the main party would have conversations between each other and with the bosses, which were pretty great fun to listen to. And another reason why I played the English dub, because there are no captions for in-game fights. And now for my overall thoughts. I expected that I'd enjoy this game, and I very much did. It does get a bit repetitive and grindy. Sometimes it felt like a bit of a chore, but that kind of does reflect the feeling of doing menial jobs for others. And to their credit, they do try to mix things up, like having certain characters only playable for certain missions. It's not much, but you can tell that they at least tried to do that. It did get a little frustrating at times, especially in the early game when I started to get my ass handed to me multiple times. But when you do get past the fight, it does feel gratifying, and while the game does look complicated, it's pretty accessible. And it does a pretty good job at explaining the mechanics to you if you ever happen to forget or misunderstand something. The developers have done the job well done with this remaster, as they really cleaned up the graphics and visuals. The 66GB DLC for high-res textures is a waste of space, loading the game more than it needs to be, but it is a separate download, so at the very least, the developers have the forethought to do that. The combat animations, when you perform hero actions, never get old. They're one of the things that I kept looking forward to, just because of how cool and over the top they are. There is a New Game Plus, and while it's a nice thing to add for those who want to complete some things they missed, or go through the game on a harder difficulty, one playthrough is more than enough for me. There is a lot of world building, but you'll have to go out of your way to learn that by talking to NPCs, because while the main story is told somewhat competently, to me at least, there are going to be some questions that go unanswered. Overall, taking a closer look at everything about this game, I'd go as far as to say that this game is kind of overlooked, considering all of the effort that's been put into it. It has its flaws, and I'm sure that there are going to be quite a few who aren't going to click with it, but if you're looking for a somewhat unconventional RPG and are a bit open-minded about your gaming choices, I'd say give this a go. Though you're going to need to put some time aside if you're going to play it, because it's a lengthy time sink. The game is currently on sale for the Steam Winter Sale, at a price that I think is kind of reasonable, but if you're still unsure, all I can say is this: it doesn't have DRM. Merry Christmas, everyone.